got Jim Corenette's 2 cents on women's wrestling this week after he reviewed WrestleMania 37 and that amazing match between Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair. Check out this clip.
Is it now that to prove that the women are equal that they have to put this match on last? Is this what it's come, that they have whittled the wrestling audience down so far to just the diehards and the people that are left that they don't see anything wrong with the last match at WrestleMania is a girls' match? And I'm not faulting their effort. So it was certainly not a bad match, but Austin, Rock, Andre, Hogan, Taker, Michaels, Hogan, Warrior, Belair, and Banks. Is this just what it is now, that the only people left watching wrestling don't mind that when 2 5'3" 130-pound girls are in the main event?
Sasha Banks is as over as any of their guys on the entire show.
That's part of the problem. They have pussified pro wrestling down to where 30 years ago people would have rioted if instead of blood and violence and people trying to kill each other, they got a fucking girls match for their main event. But now it's just, it's another funny,
But it was great. I can't believe you're shitting on this in any way.
I'm not shitting on
Was there a better match on WrestleMania Night 1? Was there a better match on WrestleMania than this match?
Now, I gotta say, I have all the respect in the world for Jim Corenette and his mind for professional wrestling. He's sharp as a tack to this day, witty as a motherfucker, and has the most extensive understanding of professional wrestling and how it should work, the psychology, the business, all aspects of it. If I was running a wrestling promotion, I would need Jim Corenette on my team. Problem is he often talks about he would never want to be a part of a product that has any other kind of bullshit other than what he likes, which is fucking late 70s, early 80s, Southern style NWA wrestling. Some fucking wrestling with some tough dudes. So this whole women's thing, though, this is bugging the fuck out of me. Because he's not the only one that's out there that's saying that. So we got to have a conversation about this. Women have proven that they are just as capable, if not more capable, than most of the male superstars in today's professional wrestling. Look at that WrestleMania card. What was legit the best match on the card? It could be debatable. You could like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. You could have liked Seth Rollins and Cesaro. But I'm going to guess that probably 90% of you would say it was Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair. What match had you the most emotionally invested in the outcome of the match? Bet you 90% of you will say Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair. These women have earned their spot. They're not just handed the spot because of fucking the Me Too's and the equalities and the women's revolutions and the liberals and blah, 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 right? Woke movement, all that shit. There's an element of it in there. That's why they advertise it so much to the mainstream. That's why they're so public about, hey, we're doing the first ever both African-American, both women main event at WrestleMania. They want to spread that around like fucking AIDS because they get good publicity off of it. Not good publicity off having AIDS, but good publicity off, well, Magic Johnson did, so you can't even say that that's not a possibility. But good publicity off of marketing the fact that you have 2 African-American women in your main event at WrestleMania. But look, they didn't put Naomi in the ring for the main event against Alicia Fox just because we just need 2 black women. These women earned their spot. The first time they earned the main event spot, the true main event spot, because WrestleMania was 1 night. So also I do think going forward, if it stays 2 nights, they'll do 1 night with the women's main event, 1 night with the men's main event to keep it equal. So there's a possibility that played a factor too. Would this have been the main event had this been Only one night? No, it probably would have been Roman and Edge and Bryan. But regardless, the women earned it the first time. Everybody thought it was a big charity case, publicity stunt for the woke women's movement and stuff. When Sasha and Charlotte and fucking Becky main evented in the triple threat. But I would argue they earned that spot too. Maybe not Charlotte as much, though Charlotte, one of the best women's wrestlers in my opinion of all time. So she earned it through being good, but she wasn't really involved in the storyline at the time. Regardless, you could honestly say with a straight face that those women deserved that spot, and you could make the case with a straight face that they deserved to be in that spot. Whether they ended up there or not, ultimately, they did. But even had they not, you could have made the case that they should have. Now, Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks. I'm going to argue that Sasha Banks is more over than most of the men on the roster. There are very few guys on the WWE roster and that are anywhere near as over as Sasha Banks is. Look at the run that Sasha and Bayley had this year during the pandemic. They were the stars of WWE. They carried that shit on their backs. I've often fantasized in my own head that they do a fucking Outsiders style Sasha and Bayley appear in like AEW. How fucking amazing would that be? Like Outsiders-esque. These two giant stars come in as a tag team, beat the shit out of the women's division. It would be fun. But I don't know that that'll ever happen when these guys are just, main eventing WrestleMania and shit. I'm sure that comes with a pretty hefty paycheck. Not only that, but the fame and the status that allows Sasha to be in the fucking Mandalorian. Seth Rollins isn't in Star Wars. Sasha Banks is in Star Wars. So who's the biggest fucking star on the roster? It's probably Sasha Banks. She's right up there. Roman Reigns isn't in Star Wars. You could argue Roman Reigns is the top male, but is he a bigger star at this point than Sasha Banks? Who is? Honestly. Then you have Bianca Belair. This woman, from the day that you saw her, there was something magic about her. At least for me, I saw it right away. There's a gajillion chicks that come through NXT, and a lot of them ain't shit, or they're great, but they're not going to be household names. They're not going to be main eventing WrestleMania. Look at the NXT women's roster now. A lot of talented women, right? But they're not. You can't look at one and go, oh, she's going to be. Maybe Raquel Gonzalez has it. She seems to be getting the old push ski, but Bianca Belair, star from day one, busted her ass. Has she put in as many dues as half the women's roster? No. But has she, half the women's roster isn't Bianca Belair either. She's a freak. She's a freak in nature. She's a freak athlete. She picks up on shit quick. She took to wrestling quicker. She has charisma coming out of her fucking eyebrows. You know what I mean? Like, she absolutely earned at least the opportunity to win a Royal Rumble and see what happens. If you really want to push like an up-and-comer, hard to think of better choices, especially in the women's division, who, if you're going to have a young up-and-comer win the women's Royal Rumble, it was Bianca's time. That's what I'm saying. She earned that spot. So Bianca and Sasha, and then you just pair them up. You just think about the two of them for a second, and you're like, oh man, I want to see that. You want to see that match. Just picturing the two of them staring each other down in your head before they ever touched. When you saw that match, that's a money match. You felt that. So there's one argument. The women earn their spot. Does WWE use it to their advantage to get good PR out of it? Abso-fucking-lutely they do. Of course. But are they just putting people that don't deserve it in that spot just to get that PR? No. These women earned it. Especially Sasha Banks. She's in the fucking Mandalorian. Do you understand? She's the next She has the chance to be the next Rock, like the female Rock. Like a WWE woman that leaves WWE, becomes a fucking Hollywood megastar. Megastar. She's already in Star Wars. She's already working for fucking Disney. That's as big as it gets. It's as big as it gets. Who's to say that fucking Marvel Studios doesn't get a look at her and want to put her in the fucking Marvel movie for to be a reoccurring superhero there? Absolutely possible. So that's one. Then the other thing, women have this stigma. You know, they did the bra and panties gimmick for a while. And then before that, they were an attraction. Cornette says that in this podcast. The women were, back in my day, women were an attraction. Well, yeah, and back in your day, it was okay to drive with no seatbelts. It was okay to smoke in front of your kids. It was okay to punch your wife a little bit if she acts up. Nobody's really going to look at you crooked. You could basically get away with drinking and driving unless you were swerving everywhere and crashing and killing people. The 70s and 80s were a pretty weird time in society where things were completely different than they are now. And it's not just that society changed, because that's the woke movement, and that's people trying to be more politically correct, and people trying to make everything trying to get equality through force. And I'm not even saying that's wrong. That sounds bad, but equality is a main thing right now, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. And if you have 2 nights of WrestleMania, I kind of do believe that women should get the first night, men should get the next. You got a women's Royal Rumble and a men's Royal Rumble. Winner, main event, winner, main event. Boom, boom. Both of them get the main event WrestleMania if you're doing 2 nights. But besides the equality thing, women are just more integrated into society. Back in Cornette's day, what he's talking about, a lot of women still just were housewives. They just stayed home and shit. There was still a lot of carryover from the 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s. You know, besides during World War II time, women traditionally do not work. So they're just the housewife. You go home, you smack her around for not cleaning up the dishes properly or putting the wrong meat on your sandwich, and you fucking read your newspaper and make the bitch get you a beer, and that's life back then. That's not life now. And that's a societal change that's not just driven by the woke movement. Women are just more active in society now. They're working more. They're in positions of leadership more. They're politics, they're bosses, they're everywhere. They're doing everything that men do already. Then you look at sports. Another thing Cornette in this episode kept comparing the fucking women's division of WWE to the WNBA compared to the NBA. And that's not apples to apples. That's apples to fucking oranges. You're comparing 2 different things. What you need to compare it to is apples to apples, and that's UFC. And Dana White was very outspoken against having women fight for the longest fucking time. He was against it. He wanted nothing to do with it. People don't want to see women get beat up, he said, beat each other up. And they're just not going to have the same kind of quality fights as men do. Men, big, tough, burly men. Rah. But the UFC, Ronda Rousey came along and changed the fucking game forever. She changed Dana White's mind, opened up the door to the UFC for the women's divisions that they have now, and the women's fights are just as good to watch as the men's. They go out there and they step up and they kick each other's ass. They don't go out there and just powder puff each other. Oh, we're women, we're going to slap fight and pull each other's hair and shit. They don't do that. They don't do that. They fight and they kick each other's ass. That fucking one fight with Johan in Beijing, Ming, I don't remember her name, but the contusions on the forehead, the swelling foreheads, they looked like Frankensteins and shit. Busted each other up. One of the best fights you will ever see in UFC, period, let alone a women's fight. And Ronda Rousey kicked open that door. Not only did she kick open the door for being the best at that time, she was showing up pretty quick as the division evolved. But when she came in, man, she was killing people. She was a monster. And that led her to become a household name. Now she's mainstream. Now she's pop culture. She's broken that door down for everybody. And it took a few years after that, but WWE slowly followed. Changed the Divas title to the Women's title again. And little things like that. But that was Ronda Rousey. And even back in the Divas day, well, this was even before the Divas day. This is still when it was for the Women's title, technically. When Lita and Trish Stratus had that killer Raw main event. But then they went through this whole bra and panties era, which damn near killed it. But now when a Ronda Rousey came through, she changed the game for everybody. She gave legitimacy to women in combat sports. So now it is entirely credible that a woman's wrestler can go in and compete at the level that a man can in professional wrestling. They always could. There were always great wrestlers. Well, Sherry Martel, I'd put her up against any man. But now they had the legitimacy. Now you could say that they can have the same kind of match as a man can. Then, Ronda Rousey's main eventing and selling more pay-per-views than any of the guys on the roster could at the time. So that opened the door to legitimacy for women to main event pay-per-views. Why can't they? They shouldn't be given the spot because women, we want women. They should get the opportunity to earn the spot like anybody else on the roster. And if they do earn the spot and they are the best and the biggest thing that people want to see at that time, then give them the goddamn main event and don't treat it like it's a fucking spectacle. Back in Cornette's days, you had the men's normal wrestling, then you threw in a midget wrestling match or a little people wrestling match if you're sensitive to that. But it was midget wrestling at the time. And then they had a women's match. They'd have a few like one-off gimmicks. Maybe they'd even have a celebrity in town for something. That shit's been going on for years and years too. Not necessarily wrestling, but just being part of the product. And they were spectacles. They were sideshows. They were bonus content, just to add a little spice to your card. You had a women's match on it. You had another gimmick match. Now I hear Cornette, and there's other ones out there too. Disco Inferno's been an active hater of women as well. Those are just two off the top of my head, but we're specifically talking about Cornette's clip here. Upset that women have almost a 50-50 split on a card. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you? It's not to pay, as long as it's not to just pander and be woke, and that it's because women have been given the opportunity and have earned the opportunity. And when they do, give them the fucking ball and let them run. It's time we start looking at pro wrestling differently. It's just not right, but that's my 2 cents. I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Leave a comment in the notes below. And, we can have a discussion about it if you want. I'm interested in your thoughts. Thanks for checking out that clip. Don't forget to check out other clips here on the channel. And while you're there, throw a like, throw a subscribe. And don't forget to check out full episodes each and every Sunday of the Pro Wrestling Podcast.